I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my own parents banned me from their 40th wedding anniversary party because I simply was not elite enough to mingle with their high society guests. Before I tell you about how they ended up accidentally hosting that very party in a historic mansion I secretly restored, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone, the harsh blue light casting long, jagged shadows across the cramped, dust-covered walls of my living room. The text message from my father was brief. It did not start with a greeting. It did not ask how my week was going or if I had eaten dinner. It was a cold, calculated directive. It read, "Joshua, do not come to the party tonight. Only high society guests will be there. We do not want to explain your situation to people who matter." I read the words over and over again until the black letters began to blur together into a meaningless shape. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not scream into a pillow. I just let out a heavy, ragged breath that seemed to rattle deep in my chest. To be completely honest with you, this was not a sudden, shocking betrayal out of nowhere. This was the predictable, steady rhythm of my entire life. My father, David, and my mother, Diana, had spent 3 long decades meticulously curating their flawless public image. To them, I was not a son. I was a loose thread on a designer suit. I was the one messy, uncontrollable detail they could never quite scrub away from their perfect narrative. I sat back heavily on my worn leather couch. It groaned under my weight. My hands, rough, scarred, and heavily calloused from years of working with raw timber and heavy stone, rested on my faded denim knees. I took a slow look around my apartment. It was small, unapologetically drafty, and cluttered with architectural blueprints, wood shavings, measuring tapes, and old hand tools. It smelled like pine, dark roast coffee, and hard work. To my parents, my life was a monumental failure. They measured a man's worth strictly by his annual salary, the ruthless reputation of his lawyer, and the brand of the watch strapped to his wrist. I measured my life by what I could build with my 2 bare hands and the history I could preserve. For hours, the silence in my apartment was absolutely deafening. I drank a lukewarm cup of bitter coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the jagged New York City skyline. I knew exactly what was happening across town at that very second. The expensive caterers were rushing around setting up crystal champagne glasses. The valet drivers were straightening their vests, preparing for the endless rush of imported luxury cars. My mother was probably snapping at a terrified florist over the exact shade of the floral centerpieces, making sure the white roses weren't too ivory, and I was completely, intentionally erased from the picture. Then, at exactly 7:52 p.m., the silence was shattered. My phone violently buzzed against the wooden coffee table. It was not another text. It was a phone call. The caller ID flashed brightly. Matthew. My older brother. The golden child. I sat there and watched it vibrate. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and finally picked it up. I did not say hello. "Joshua." Matthew's voice cracked through the tiny speaker. He was breathing hard, practically panting, like he had just sprinted up a steep flight of stairs in his custom-tailored suit. In the background, I could hear a chaotic, buzzing hum of classical string music colliding with panicked, overlapping murmurs. "Why the hell did you hide this from the family?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I kept my voice perfectly flat. "Hide what, Matthew? Don't play dumb with me, you idiot," he hissed, the panic making his voice pitch higher than usual. "Mom is hyperventilating in the powder room. Dad looks like he just saw a damn ghost. People are asking questions. Important people. Judge Mason is standing in the middle of the foyer demanding answers. You set us up. You humiliated us in front of everyone we know." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I didn't set you up, Matthew. I just went to work. It's not my fault none of you ever bothered to ask what I actually do for a living." I hit the red button and ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the cushion next to me. A slow, unfamiliar feeling began to spread through my chest, warming my ribs. It was not anger. It was not sorrow. It was total, absolute clarity. Little did Matthew know, his panicked, breathless phone call was just the very beginning. The truth was finally unraveling, and they were trapped in a cage of their own making. A cage I had quite literally built from the ground up. To understand how my so-called perfect family ended up self-destructing in front of the entire city's elite, I have to take you back. I have to show you the exact moment I realized my family did not just misunderstand me. They were actively, deeply ashamed of me. I was born into the wealthy Thompson family, but from the moment I could walk and talk, I never truly felt like a Thompson. My father, David, was a ruthless corporate executive who spoke almost exclusively in business buzzwords and treated every family dinner conversation like a hostile board meeting. My mother, Diana, was a prominent socialite whose full-time job was maintaining a flawless, impenetrable facade of old money elegance. To them, success was not a personal journey. It was a rigid, mathematical formula. You get the right Ivy League degree, you secure the massive six-figure salary, you aggressively aim for the next promotion, and you marry someone who looks exceptionally good in a country club newsletter. Matthew, my older brother by 4 years, was the ultimate shining return on their investment. He was a shark, a ruthless corporate lawyer specializing in high-profile, devastating divorce cases for the ultra-wealthy. He made senior partner at his firm by the time he was 30. He drove a European sports car that cost more than most people's homes, and he wore bespoke suits that screamed power. At Thanksgiving dinners, my parents would practically clear the table just to make room for Matthew's massive ego. They endlessly bragged about his brutal court cases, his future inheritance prospects, and his supposedly brilliant legal mind. Then there was me. I never cared about climbing the corporate ladder. The thought of sitting in a glass office staring at spreadsheets made my skin crawl. I loved history. I loved the earthy smell of old pine, the intricate, forgotten craftsmanship of buildings that had stood tall for centuries, weathering storms and generations. I decided early on to study historic preservation and architecture. I wanted to save forgotten places from being bulldozed by greedy developers who only saw dollar signs. My father looked at me like I had just announced I was joining a traveling circus. I distinctly remember standing in his dark, mahogany-paneled home office when I told him my chosen college major. He did not even look up from his stack of financial reports. He just slowly adjusted his expensive glasses, sighed heavily, and said, "Joshua, playing with old wood is a cute hobby for the weekends, not a career for a man. If you don't choose a respectable path, you will never amount to anything in the real world. You'll be a laborer." My mother was infinitely worse. She didn't yell. She weaponized her shame with a smile. When she hosted her extravagant charity luncheons in our backyard, she would proudly introduce Matthew as her brilliant, handsome lawyer son. But when her wealthy friends turned their polite smiles to me and asked what I was studying, her jaw would tighten. "Oh," she would say, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Joshua is our little bohemian. He plays with old houses. He's finding himself." The sheer condescension dripped from her tongue like poison. They treated my passion, my life's calling, like an embarrassing funeral for their social reputation. I quickly learned to keep my head down and my mouth shut. I funded my own education after they quietly drained the college fund they had supposedly set aside for me, claiming Matthew desperately needed it more for his Ivy League law school tuition. I worked grueling, back-breaking hours on dusty construction sites, learning the grain of every wood and the structural integrity of every stone from men twice my age. I slowly, painfully built my own architectural firm from the ground up. I did not ask my parents for a single dime, but the memory that truly shattered any remaining illusion of a family bond happened exactly 3 years ago. It was Matthew's grand wedding. Matthew was marrying Sophia, a high-powered corporate executive who fit my parents' mold perfectly. The wedding was a lavish, sickeningly expensive affair at an exclusive waterfront estate. I saved up my meager earnings for months just to buy a decent, tailored suit so I wouldn't embarrass them in front of their friends. I stood quietly in the back during the ceremony. When it was finally time for the official family portraits, The frantic photographer ushered us all onto the grand marble staircase. I stood on the far left edge of the group, trying not to step on my mother's dress. My mother kept waving her hands aggressively, directing the photographer. "Make sure you capture the natural lighting on Sophia's dress," she chimed. "Oh, and Matthew, darling, turn your good side to the camera." "Perfect." I smiled for the flashes, genuinely happy for my brother despite everything. A week later, I was sitting in my apartment, casually scrolling through social media while eating dinner. I stopped scrolling. My mother had posted the official, professionally edited family portrait with the caption, "My perfect, beautiful family." I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. I was not in the photo. She had deliberately, intentionally cropped me out. The left edge of the frame ended exactly where Matthew's tailored shoulder began. My own mother looked at a picture of her family, saw her youngest son standing there in the suit he worked months to afford, and decided the aesthetic composition looked better without him in it. I did not call her to yell. I did not demand a tearful apology. I just slowly closed my laptop. That was the exact day I stopped trying. I stopped showing up to their tense Sunday dinners. I stopped answering their passive-aggressive, probing texts. I realized with absolute certainty that I could not force them to respect me, but I sure as hell could stop handing them the ammunition to hurt me. I buried myself entirely in my work, and soon enough the work rewarded me in a way my family never, ever could. 3 years ago, the Carrington estate was sitting squarely on death row. It was a massive, 200-year-old architectural marvel planted right in the beating heart of the city. It boasted soaring, hand-carved archways, massive solid mahogany doors, and a grand foyer that looked like it belonged in a European museum. But decades of gross neglect had left it rotting from the inside out. A major, ruthless real estate developer had bought the land and planned to tear the historic masterpiece down to build a sterile, soulless, glass-paneled shopping mall. The local historical society had basically thrown their hands up and given up. But the National Heritage Foundation had one last, desperate card to play. Dr. Carter, the senior director of the foundation, absolutely refused to let the estate fall to the wrecking ball. He was a stern, brilliant, no-nonsense man who cared infinitely more about preserving history than making a quick buck. He started quietly, secretly looking for an architect who was crazy enough to take on an impossible restoration project with a limited budget and an absolutely insane deadline. He found me. I spent 4 sleepless, coffee-fueled weeks drafting a comprehensive restoration proposal. I dug through dusty city archives until my fingers were black with ink. I studied the original, fragile blueprints from the 1800s. I mapped out exactly how to reinforce the crumbling foundation without destroying the original masonry. When I finally walked into Dr. Carter's pristine office to present my plan, I did not wear a designer suit or carry a leather briefcase. I wore my scuffed work boots and a plain button-down shirt. I forcefully rolled out the massive blueprints on his desk, pinning the corners down. "I am not just going to patch the holes and paint over the rot," I told him, pointing directly to the grand foyer design. "I am going to bring the soul back to this building. I know exactly where to source the reclaimed timber for the front doors. I know how to fix the vaulted ceilings. We can save it." Dr. Carter looked closely at the detailed plans for a long time, then looked up at me, his eyes piercing. He extended his hand. "You have the job, Joshua, but listen to me carefully. We need to keep this entirely quiet. The developers have deep pockets and lawyers who will try to sabotage our permits if they know we have a viable restoration plan. We work in the shadows until the ribbon is cut." I agreed immediately. I legally registered the project under the obscure name of my LLC. No one in the press knew my name, and much more importantly, absolutely no one in my family knew. For the next 18 months, the Carrington estate became my entire world. I practically lived in the dust, the scaffolding, and the debris. I worked shoulder to shoulder with a grizzled head carpenter named Liam. Liam was a tough man of few words, but he understood wood grain better than anyone I had ever met. Together, we spent 3 grueling, back-breaking months just restoring the massive main entrance doors. We used chemical strippers to peel away decades of cheap, ugly paint, sanded down the deep rot, and painstakingly repaired the intricate floral carvings by hand using tiny chisels. My fingers constantly bled. My muscles ached so badly I could barely sleep. I breathed in sawdust and exhaust fumes every single day. But every time I wiped the sweat from my brow and looked at those doors coming back to life, I felt a surge of pure, unfiltered pride. During those entire 18 months, my family reached out a grand total of 3 times. Mostly, it was just my mother sending annoying mass text updates to the whole family about Matthew winning a massive custody battle or securing another sickeningly large bonus. I ignored every single one of them. I was building a lasting legacy while they were obsessed with building a fragile facade. Then the letter arrived. It was a crisp, cool Tuesday morning. I opened my rusty apartment mailbox and pulled out a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with a gold seal from the American Institute of Architects. The AIA. I stared at it for a moment, then tore it open, my heart suddenly hammering violently against my ribs. I scanned the heavy cardstock. The words leaped off the page. They were officially nominating me for the Gold Medal of Architecture for my undercover work on the Carrington estate. It was the highest, most prestigious honor in the entire industry. It was the kind of award that instantly defined a career and cemented a legacy. The formal letter stated that the nomination would be announced to the public and the press the following Friday at exactly 7:30 p.m. I sat down hard on the wooden floor of my apartment and laughed. It was a raw, exhausted, triumphant laugh. All those years of being called a disappointment. All those years of being treated as the family embarrassment. The greatest architectural minds in the country had just validated my life's work in the biggest way possible. I didn't call my parents to brag. I didn't want their fake, strained congratulations. I carefully folded the letter, placed it securely in my desk drawer, and immediately went back to work. But the universe has a very funny, deeply ironic way of balancing the scales of justice. Because the exact date and time of the AIA public announcement was the exact same date and time as my parents' highly anticipated, incredibly expensive 40th wedding anniversary party. The week of the grand anniversary party, the heavy silence from my family was finally broken. But it wasn't because they suddenly missed me or wanted to formally invite me. It was to ensure I stayed far, far away from their perfect evening. It started with a phone call from Matthew on a Wednesday afternoon. I wiped the dark wood stain off my hands with a rag and answered. "Hey, little brother," Matthew said. His tone was aggressively cheerful and slick, which immediately told me he wanted something. "Just checking in. Seeing how the starving artist life is treating you these days." "I'm fine, Matthew. I'm working. What do you want?" I asked, refusing to play his games, going straight to the point. He let out a short, patronizing chuckle. "Look, the anniversary party is this Friday. Mom is absolutely losing her mind over the catering menu and the seating charts. I just wanted to touch base with you. You know it's going to be a very heavy crowd, right? Senior partners from my law firm, local politicians, old money folks. It's not exactly your scene. Lots of shop talk about stocks and corporate mergers." He was fishing. He desperately wanted me to get angry and defensive. He wanted to gather some pathetic, sad gossip about his struggling younger brother so he could share it over expensive glasses of scotch with his arrogant lawyer buddies. "I'm busy anyway, Matthew," I said coldly, my voice steady. "Don't worry about me crashing your networking event." "Good, good," he replied smoothly, sounding relieved. "You know how Mom gets about her public image. Better to just avoid the drama altogether. Anyway, I have a massive divorce settlement to negotiate this afternoon. Talk later." He hung up before I could reply. My jaw tightened until my teeth ground together. He didn't even have the guts to explicitly tell me not to come to my own parents' anniversary. He just danced around it like the manipulative coward he always was. The explicit, undeniable ban came the very next day. The text from my father arrived on Thursday evening. "Joshua, do not come to the party tonight. Only high society guests will be there. We do not want to explain your situation to people who matter." I read it twice. The words burned. Explain your situation. What situation? That I worked an honest, blue-collar job? that I didn't wear a shiny Rolex or drive a leased sports car. The blatant, cruel disrespect made my blood boil, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and stay calm. They were irrelevant to my actual life now. Their opinions meant nothing. But then, Friday morning, the actual day of the party, I received a text message that pushed me completely over the edge. It was from Aunt Sarah, my mother's younger sister. Aunt Sarah was always a bit scatterbrained and gullible, but she was generally a kind person. The text read, "Joshua, honey, I am so incredibly sorry you are going through such a hard time right now. I am praying so hard for your recovery. It breaks my heart that you are confined to a facility right now, but mental health is so important. We will all miss you dearly tonight. Stay strong." I froze in my kitchen. I stared at the glowing words, my mind racing. A facility? Recovery? What on earth was she talking about? I immediately opened the Facebook app on my phone and went straight to my mother's public profile. There it was, a long, dramatic post from 2 days ago. "Thank you all for the beautiful, heartfelt anniversary wishes. David and I are so incredibly blessed to have such wonderful friends. Many of you have kindly asked about our youngest son, Joshua. Unfortunately, with a heavy heart, I must share that Joshua is battling severe mental health struggles and is currently receiving residential treatment at a private facility. We humbly ask for your prayers and privacy during this dark, difficult time. We will be celebrating for him in spirit tonight." Beneath the sickening post were dozens of comments from her wealthy, oblivious friends, sending prayers and light. "You are such a strong, brave mother, Diana. How absolutely tragic. Stay strong." My hands shook violently. I gripped the edge of my granite kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned stark white. My mother had not just uninvited me to save face. She had completely fabricated a severe mental breakdown and committed me to an imaginary psychiatric ward just so she wouldn't have to admit to her snobby country club friends that her son was a working-class architect. She actively used a fake, tragic illness to generate sympathy and attention for herself. The sheer malice and sociopathic nature of the lie took my breath away. At that exact moment, another text popped up on my screen. It was from Dr. Carter. "Joshua, big night tonight. The AIA announcement officially drops at 7:30 p.m. sharp. I will actually be attending a private gala event at the Carrington estate tonight, but I will make sure to raise a glass and make a toast to you. See you Monday morning." I stopped breathing. The air left my lungs. I read the text again. Dr. Carter was attending a private event at the Carrington estate tonight. My heart began to race. I frantically pulled up my mother's digital email invitation that Matthew had accidentally forwarded to me months ago. I zoomed in on the elegant, cursive font detailing the location. The Thompson 40th Anniversary Gala. Location: the Grand Foyer, the Carrington estate. A cold, sharp, dangerous smile slowly spread across my face. They rented the Carrington estate. My parents, who valued social status and appearances above all else in this world, had paid an exorbitant amount of money to host their elite, snobby party in the most exclusive, newly restored historical venue in the entire city. They were throwing a massive party inside my personal masterpiece, and they had absolutely no idea. By 6 p.m. that evening, the normally quiet street outside the Carrington estate had transformed into a parade of absurd, sickening wealth. Even from a block away, sitting quietly in the driver's seat of my beat-up, dust-covered work truck, I watched the entire spectacle unfold like a movie. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled smoothly up to the curb, closely followed by a cherry-red Ferrari, a roaring yellow Lamborghini, and a pristine silver Porsche. The frantic valet drivers scrambled in their uniforms to quickly open doors for older men in sharply tailored tuxedos and women dripping in heavy diamond necklaces. Through the massive, sparkling glass windows of the Grand Foyer, windows I had personally recaulked and polished, I could clearly see my mother. Diana was absolutely in her element. She was wearing a glittering, form-fitting silver gown, holding a crystal champagne flute elegantly in one hand, and laughing loudly at something the city mayor had just said. My father, David, stood proudly beside her, puffing his chest out in his expensive suit and vigorously shaking hands with the senior partners from Matthew's law firm. They were standing directly under the massive, tiered crystal chandelier I had spent 2 weeks carefully hand-wiring. They were casually leaning against the polished mahogany banister I had spent 3 grueling weeks sanding, staining, and sealing. Every single inch of that magnificent room was deeply saturated with my sweat, my vision, and my late nights. I checked the dashboard clock in my truck. 7:25 p.m. Inside the brightly lit hall, a professional string quartet was playing soft, elegant classical music. According to Dr. Carter, who gleefully filled me in on the specific details later that night, my father confidently tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon to command the room's attention and make his grand speech. He warmly welcomed the wealthy guests, bragged extensively about his successful corporate career, heavily praised Matthew's recent promotion to senior partner, and briefly, with a perfectly practiced, heartbreaking look of sorrow, mentioned their ailing, absent son Joshua, who could not be there due to his unfortunate, ongoing health crisis. The elite crowd murmured with gentle, sympathetic nods. They looked at my parents with pity and admiration. The perfect, resilient elite family, bravely dealing with such a tragic, heavy burden. Then, the clock struck exactly 7:30 p.m. The American Institute of Architects hit the publish button on their website, sent out their mass press release to every major news outlet in the country, and blasted the massive announcement across all their social media platforms simultaneously. The digital news alerts started pinging almost immediately. First, it was just 1 or 2 phones vibrating and buzzing in the suit pockets of the journalists and city officials mingling in the room. Then it became a rapid ripple effect. Dozens of phones lit up brightly. Chimes and ringtones interrupted the soft string music. People started looking down at their glowing screens. The bold headline read, "AIA announces gold medal nominee, Joshua Thompson, the brilliant secret architect behind the Carrington Estate restoration." The lengthy article featured a massive, high-definition photo of me standing proudly in front of the very mahogany doors the guests had just walked through. It detailed my secretive, 18-month undercover project. It heavily praised my innovative preservation techniques, and it explicitly, undeniably named me as the sole owner and head architect of the firm. Inside the grand foyer, the whispers began instantly. Heads snapped up from cell phones to stare directly at David and Diana. The string quartet faltered, playing out of tune, completely oblivious to the massive bomb that had just detonated in the center of the room. Judge Mason, a highly respected, no-nonsense federal judge and a longtime acquaintance of my father, pulled out his reading glasses, put them on, and stared hard at his phone. His face hardened. He walked purposefully directly up to my parents, cutting through the crowd. "David," Judge Mason's booming, authoritative voice cut sharply through the polite, confused chatter. "Did you just read this breaking news alert from the AIA?" "I don't really follow architectural news, Arthur." My father chuckled nervously, clearly sensing the sudden, drastic shift in the room's energy but not knowing why. "You should start," Judge Mason said coldly, his eyes narrowed. He held up his large phone, showing the bright picture of my face to my father. "It seems the brilliant architect who meticulously restored this magnificent building we are standing in is your son. The exact same son Diana just stood there and told us is currently locked up in a mental facility." My mother's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale white. Her hand shook so violently her champagne flute rattled. That must be some sort of mistake. A bizarre coincidence. Another man named Joshua Thompson. It has his picture right here. Diana? Aunt Sarah spoke up loudly from the middle of the crowd, her voice carrying a potent mix of deep shock and rising, fiery anger. "He isn't sick at all, is he? You lied to me. You lied to all of us just to cover up the fact that you're embarrassed by him." Out in my truck, at exactly 7:52 p.m., my phone rang. It was Matthew, the panicked, breathless phone call I told you about at the beginning. "Joshua, why the hell did you hide this from the family?" I hung up on him. I took one long, deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. I stepped out of my truck. I smoothed down the front of my simple, perfectly tailored black suit. I didn't need a Rolls-Royce to make an entrance. I had built the building. I walked slowly and deliberately up the wide stone steps. The valet driver moved to try and stop me, seeing I didn't arrive in a luxury car, but I didn't even look at him. I simply reached out and pushed open the massive, heavy wooden front doors. The doors my hands had brought back to life. They swung open with a smooth, completely silent glide. I stepped confidently into the bright, glittering grand foyer. The entire room felt dead, completely silent. 150 of the city's most elite, powerful people stopped talking mid-sentence. Every single pair of eyes locked onto me. The string quartet finally ground to an awkward, screeching halt. I stood tall at the entrance. I didn't look at the whispering crowd. I locked eyes directly with my parents, who were standing frozen in the center of the room, looking exactly like they were facing a firing squad. I walked slowly and deliberately across the highly polished marble floor. The wealthy crowd naturally parted for me, stepping back as if I were royalty, or a ghost returning to haunt them. I stopped just a few feet away from my parents and Matthew. The tension in the air was so thick it was suffocating. Matthew's jaw was clenched so tightly I legitimately thought his teeth would shatter under the pressure. A thick blue vein throbbed furiously on his temple. My father, the supposedly untouchable corporate titan, looked physically shrunken, his broad shoulders hunched forward in defeat. My mother looked frantically around the silent room, her eyes darting from face to face, desperately trying to find a friendly ally, a way to spin the narrative, but there was nowhere left to hide. The truth was glaring. "Hello, Mom, Dad," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the absolute, dead silence of the massive hall, it echoed clearly off the high vaulted ceilings I had restored. "Joshua," my father choked out, his voice cracking. "What is the meaning of all this?" "I received your text earlier," I said calmly, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. "The one where you specifically banned me from this anniversary party because I wasn't an elite guest. I wasn't going to come. I had no intention of being here. But then I realized something rather important." I raised my arm and gestured widely to the soaring, intricately carved arches above us, the gleaming wood panels on the walls, the perfectly restored sweeping staircase. "This building is my project. I spent 18 brutal months of my life breathing life back into these walls while you completely ignored my existence. I bled for this place. I built this." My mother took a desperate step forward, her manicured hands fluttering in a wild panic. "Joshua, sweetie, please lower your voice. Let's talk about this in private in the back room. We thought you'd be more comfortable at home. You know how anxious you get in large crowds." "Stop." I cut her off. My voice cracked like a whip, sharp and unforgiving. "Don't you dare stand there and play the concerned, loving mother right now. I saw your Facebook post, Diana. I know exactly what you did. You told all your wealthy friends I was locked in a psychiatric ward just so you wouldn't have to admit to them that your son works with his hands. You faked a disease." A collective, audible gasp rippled violently through the crowd of elites. I heard a woman in diamonds whisper fiercely to her husband, "My God, how absolutely sick. That's a lie." Matthew barked aggressively, stepping up to shield them, his vicious lawyer instincts automatically kicking in. "You're trespassing, Joshua. You're making a scene. Leave right now before I call security and have you physically removed." "Call them." A new, booming voice rang out from the crowd. From the back of the room, Dr. Carter stepped forward. He walked past the stunned millionaires and wide-eyed politicians with an air of absolute, undeniable authority. He stopped right beside me, crossing his arms, and turned to face my father and Matthew. "Go ahead and call security, Matthew, and I promise I will have them escort you and your parents off the premises immediately," Dr. Carter said, his tone icy and resolute. "As the senior director of the National Heritage Foundation, I formally control this property, and Joshua is my invited guest of honor." My father opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish out of water. Dr. Carter turned away from them and addressed the silent crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, you have spent the entire evening drinking champagne and admiring the breathtaking genius of this historical restoration. The brilliant man responsible for every detail you see is Joshua Thompson. He is a true visionary in our field. And tonight, I am not just here to celebrate his well-deserved AIA Gold Medal nomination. Dr. Carter reached into his tailored suit jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed white envelope. He turned and handed it directly to me. The Foundation's board has officially approved a $500,000 grant for the complete restoration of the historic downtown city library, and we have unanimously chosen Joshua to lead the entire project as the head architect. The stunned silence held for a split second before Judge Mason, standing near the front, started clapping. Started as a slow, deliberate, heavy clap. Then Aunt Sarah joined in. Within seconds, the entire room erupted. The applause was absolutely deafening. The very people my parents had spent their entire pathetic lives trying to impress and suck up to were now giving me a massive, roaring standing ovation. I looked at my family one last time. Matthew looked like he was going to be physically sick, his face pale and twisted in fury. My father stared blankly at the marble floor, completely and utterly defeated, his legacy shattered. My mother was standing completely alone, her former friends actively, physically stepping away from her to avoid the toxic fallout of her repulsive lies. They had spent their entire lives desperately trying to control the narrative, and in one single night, I had burned their fake script to the ground. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for staying with me until here. You are amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been with me this far. This not only helps more people find this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The roaring applause slowly began to die down. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream at them. I didn't call them names. I didn't need to do any of that. The crushing silence of their public humiliation was infinitely louder than any insult I could have possibly thrown at them. I looked calmly at my parents. I am not here to ruin your party, I said quietly, though the guests standing nearby could hear every single word clearly. I am here because this place matters to me, and I wanted to walk through the doors I built. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I turned my back on them. I walked slowly back through the parted crowd. Powerful people I didn't even know reached out to shake my hand, pat my shoulder, and loudly congratulate me on the grant and the nomination. I nodded politely, offering brief smiles, but I kept walking toward the exit. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. The valet drivers were still standing rigidly by the luxury cars, but I walked right past the sleek Rolls-Royce and the shiny Porsche. I got back into my battered, reliable truck. I put the keys in the ignition, and the engine roared to life with a comforting rumble. As I drove away from the Carrington estate, I looked in the rearview mirror. The grand mansion was glowing warmly against the dark city sky, standing strong, beautiful, and secure. I had saved it, and in the process I had finally saved myself. I left them entirely behind in the pathetic wreckage of their own lies, and for the first time in 32 years, I felt completely, undeniably free. The morning after the Carrington Estate anniversary party, I woke up in my cramped apartment just as the first rays of sunlight began to crawl across the city skyline. I want to try and explain exactly how that morning felt, because if you have ever lived under the crushing weight of toxic family expectations, you will understand this feeling in your bones. For the first time in 32 years, my chest did not feel tight. That heavy, invisible cinder block of constantly seeking my family's approval, of constantly waiting for the next insult or the next exclusion, had completely vanished. It was gone. I breathed in, and my lungs actually felt full. I threw off my cheap blankets, walked into my small kitchen, and brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. I stood by the window watching the street below slowly come to life. The delivery trucks were rolling by, the street sweepers were working, the city was waking up. My cell phone sat on the kitchen counter. It had been vibrating constantly since midnight, a relentless buzzing against the wood, but I had intentionally turned the screen face down. I wanted to enjoy my coffee in total peace. When I finally picked it up, I had 74 unread text messages and 20 missed calls. But they were not angry, panicked messages from my family. They were messages from other architects, from historical preservationists, from city board members, and from complete strangers in the industry. People who had read the official AIA press release and seen the breaking news coverage. The story of the secret architect who saved the Carrington estate was suddenly everywhere. I scrolled past the genuine congratulations, the frantic requests for magazine interviews, and the sudden, overwhelming influx of high-paying job offers. I did not care about the money. I did not care about securing a massive new salary. I cared about the respect. For the first time in my entire adult life, people saw me for the actual work I produced with my own two hands, not the pedigree of my last name. Meanwhile, the absolute fallout for the Thompson family was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. Over the next few weeks, the stories slowly filtered back to me through Dr. Carter and a few local journalists who had attended the party. My parents, David and Diana, became total social pariahs overnight in their elite, snobbish circles. The high society crowd they had spent 3 long decades meticulously courting completely iced them out. In their world, you can be ruthless, you can be greedy, but you cannot be publicly embarrassing. And my parents had become the ultimate public embarrassment. Judge Mason, a man who commanded absolute respect in this city, immediately and publicly resigned from the prominent charity board my mother sat on. He cited a fundamental difference in basic moral values. When a highly respected federal judge publicly distances himself from you, the rest of the country club quickly follows suit. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that my mother walked into her favorite upscale dining room a week later, and 3 different tables of her so-called best friends suddenly found the ceiling extremely interesting. No one would make eye contact with her. My mother's perfectly curated Facebook page, once a daily shrine to her fake, flawless life, was absolutely bombarded with angry, disgusted comments from the very friends she had lied to. People do not like being manipulated, especially wealthy people who hate being made to look like fools. She eventually had to permanently delete her entire social media presence. Her facade was gone. My father did not fare any better. He had spent the last 5 years aggressively angling for a major promotion to the global executive board of his massive corporate firm. But suddenly, he was quietly passed over. The senior board members made it clear behind closed doors that a man who publicly lied about his own son being locked in a psychiatric ward just to save face at a cocktail party was absolutely not someone they could trust with a global corporate image. His reputation as a trustworthy leader was entirely shattered. But the most spectacular, devastating collapse belonged to my older brother, Matthew. Exactly 1 week after the party, my phone rang. I was standing in the middle of a dusty lumber yard, inspecting a massive shipment of reclaimed oak timber for the new city library project. I wiped the dirt off my hands onto my jeans and looked at the screen. The caller ID said Sophia, Matthew's wife. I hesitated for a long second, listening to the roar of the forklifts around me, and then I answered. Hello, Sophia. Joshua, she said. Her voice was sharp, exhausted, and completely devoid of the usual polite, polished corporate warmth she always used at family Thanksgiving dinners. I need you to tell me the absolute truth right now, because I feel like I have been living a complete lie for the past 3 years of my marriage. I leaned my shoulder against a massive stack of timber. What do you want to know, Sophia? Everything, Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly, thick with a deep, boiling anger. Matthew came home from the anniversary gala in a blind, screaming rage. He smashed an expensive vase against the hallway wall and completely blamed you for ruining his reputation. He told me you maliciously crashed the party just to humiliate his parents because you were jealous of his success. But then I woke up the next morning and I read the AIA article. I read the direct quotes from Dr. Carter and Judge Mason. I read the screenshot of the Facebook post your mother made about you being in a mental facility. Joshua, I need to hear it from you. Did they really ban you from the party and fake a severe mental illness? Yes, I answered simply, keeping my voice perfectly steady. They did exactly that. Sophia let out a long, shaky, ragged breath. Matthew told me you were a lazy trust fund kid who simply refused to work. He told me you blew through your entire college fund partying and making terrible choices, and that was why you were struggling to make ends meet in a tiny apartment. He told me he had to pay his own way through his Ivy League law school because you selfishly drained the family accounts. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. The sheer audacity of his lies was almost impressive in a twisted way. Sophia, my parents drained my college fund when I was 18 specifically to pay for Matthew's law school tuition. They gave him everything. I paid for my own community college classes and my state university degree by working brutal construction jobs on the weekends and picking up night shifts. I have never taken a single dime from them since I walked out of that house. Matthew literally stole my fund, and he used it to build his perfect, shiny life with you. The phone line went dead silent for a very long time. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic in the background on her end, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of a hammer at the lumber yard on mine. When she finally spoke again, her voice was as cold as solid ice. My husband is a high-powered divorce lawyer, Sophia said quietly, the realization dawning on her in real time. He spends his entire day destroying families, manipulating the truth, and hiding assets. I always thought he left that ruthlessness at the office. I thought it was just a job. I didn't realize he brought it home. I didn't realize he used it on his own flesh and blood. He lied to me about who he is. Sophia, I am truly sorry you are caught in the middle of this mess, I said honestly. I didn't hate her. She was just another victim of the Thompson family illusion. Don't be sorry for me, Joshua. Be sorry for him, she replied, her voice hardening into steel. Because I am filing for divorce this afternoon, and I am going to make sure he loses everything he actually values. She hung up the phone. A month later, the news hit the local family grapevine like an absolute earthquake. Sophia had indeed filed for a brutal, highly publicized, messy divorce. She didn't hold back. She immediately hired the most aggressive, ruthless lawyer in the city, a man who happened to be Matthew's biggest, most hated courtroom rival. The irony was incredibly poetic. Matthew, the golden child who rigidly measured success by his perfect marriage, his expensive cars, and his future inheritance, was now fighting a massive, losing battle over the custody of their shared assets. He was frantically spending his days desperately trying to keep his own law firm partners from pushing him out the door due to the embarrassing public scandal. That very night, I received a long text message from Matthew. It came through at 3 a.m, clearly fueled by cheap alcohol and a desperate, blinding rage. You ruined my life. You ruined Mom and Dad. You took away my marriage and you destroyed my career. You are a toxic plague on this family. I hope you are happy playing with your stupid wooden doors, you selfish, pathetic loser. You will never be a real Thompson. I sat in the dark living room of my apartment and read the glowing text message. A year ago, those exact words would have cut me straight to the bone. They would have sent me into a dark, suffocating spiral of guilt, depression, and self-doubt. I would have wondered if he was right. I would have wondered if I really was the problem. But sitting there that night, holding the phone in my calloused hands, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of pity. Matthew was a hollow, empty shell of a man. He had built his entire identity, his entire ego, on a fragile foundation of lies, family money, and the constant belittlement of his younger brother. And the exact moment the truth exposed the deep cracks in his foundation, his whole house completely collapsed. He had no real skills to fall back on, no genuine character to keep him standing. I did not type out an angry reply. I did not defend myself. I simply tapped his contact name, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and hit block caller. It was the digital equivalent of attending the funeral for our relationship, and I did not shed a single tear. It was finally over. 3 months quickly passed. The dust in the city finally began to settle. The Carrington estate officially opened its grand doors to the public, and it was a massive, undeniable success. The city mayor cut the ribbon. The architectural critics praised the meticulous, groundbreaking restoration techniques, and my firm began hiring a full staff of young, hungry architects to handle the massive influx of new commercial contracts. I was busy, I was exhausted, but I was incredibly fulfilled. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. I recognized the digits immediately. It was my father, David. "Joshua, it has been a few months. Your mother and I have had a lot of time to reflect on the unfortunate misunderstandings that happened at the anniversary party. I read in the local paper that you are starting the groundbreaking for the downtown city library next week. I would love to come down to the site, shake your hand, and take a look at the blueprints. Let's put the past behind us." A father should be able to see his son's success. I sat perfectly still at my drafting table and stared at the screen. I analyzed the text word by word. It was an absolute masterpiece of classic corporate manipulation. Notice the specific language he used. He didn't apologize. He didn't take an ounce of accountability. He boldly called his cruel, calculated exclusion and my mother's psychotic, damaging lies an unfortunate misunderstanding. He didn't suddenly love me. He wanted to visit the new, highly publicized library project so he could be seen publicly associating with the newly famous, award-winning architect. He was desperately trying to leech off my new professional halo to repair his heavily damaged social standing in the city. He wanted a prime photo opportunity. He wanted to shake my hand in front of the construction crew and the local journalists to show his wealthy friends that the Thompson family was back together, united, and stronger than ever. He wanted to use me as a prop. Again. I looked down at the massive, detailed blueprint of the library spread across my desk. I thought about the 18 months I spent sweating in the dark, breathing in toxic dust at the Carrington estate, completely ignored by the exact man who was now asking for a front-row VIP seat to my hard-earned success. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the keyboard, and typed my final reply. "David, there was no misunderstanding. You and Diana made your choices very clearly over the last 30 years. I am busy working on the library, and the construction site is permanently closed to the public. Do not contact me again. I wish you both a good life." I hit send. I immediately blocked his number, just like I had done to Matthew. I placed the phone face down on the desk, picked up my heavy lead pencil, and went right back to drawing my plans. That was the final, unbreakable boundary. I had spent the last 3 months learning how to forgive them in my own heart, so I wouldn't carry the bitter, heavy poison of resentment forever. But I also learned a vital truth. Forgiveness does not equal access. I forgave them for being broken people, but I absolutely did not owe them a seat at the table they had explicitly banned me from. It is a crisp, cool autumn morning in the city. I am standing right in the middle of the dusty, uneven pavement of the downtown city square. I am wearing my scuffed, dirt-stained steel-toed boots, faded denim jeans, and a thick, heavy canvas work jacket. The air around me smells sharply of diesel exhaust from the idling trucks, fresh wet cement, and damp, excavated earth. Directly in front of me is the massive, sprawling steel skeleton of the historic city library. Liam, my grizzled, loyal head carpenter, walks slowly up beside me holding 2 steaming cups of black diner coffee in cheap paper cups. He hands one directly to me without saying a single word, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the massive steel beams being hoisted high into the air by the giant crane operators. The structural reinforcements on the west wing are holding perfectly, Liam grunts, his breath pluming in the cold air as he takes a loud sip of his coffee. "Those old brick walls aren't going to shift an inch for another 200 years, boss." I smile, taking the warm cup in my freezing hands, feeling the heat seep into my calloused palms. "Good work, Liam. Make sure the masonry crew takes their absolute time on the archway details today. We don't rush the important stuff. We do it right the first time." "Never do," he nods firmly, turning back around to shout aloud, gruff command at a forklift driver backing up too fast. I stand there in the dirt and watch the crew work. There are over 50 men and women on this site today. Welders, carpenters, electricians, masons, and every single one of them looks to me for direction. They do not care about my last name. They do not care about where I buy my suits, what brand of watch I wear, or what exclusive country club my parents belong to. They respect me for one simple reason. Because I know how to accurately read a complex load-bearing wall, I know how to swing a heavy hammer until my hands bleed, and I treat them with the basic, fundamental human dignity my family never understood. This library project is vastly different from the Carrington estate. The estate was undeniably beautiful, but it was ultimately a private, exclusive playground for the city's wealthy elite, the people who attended my parents' party. But this library, this building belongs to everyone. When my crew and I finally finish these massive, heavy oak doors and open them wide to the public, children from all over the city will walk through them to read, to learn, and to dream. Hardworking, everyday people will sit quietly in the reading rooms under the beautifully restored glass skylights. It is a massive building for the people, built by people who actually understand the true value of honest, grueling hard work. I take a slow, deep sip of my bitter coffee and let the bright morning sun warm my cold face. I close my eyes for a second and think about the long, painful journey that brought me to this very spot in the dirt. I think about that scared, lonely, quiet kid who used to hide in his bedroom upstairs, obsessively drawing houses and buildings while his parents loudly bragged about his older brother to their dinner guests downstairs. I think about the years, decades, really, of desperately, painfully craving a simple, genuine, "I am proud of you," from a father who only respected a high corporate salary and a ruthless cutthroat attitude. For the longest time, I used to truly believe that my value as a man was a currency controlled entirely by my family. I thought they were the bank. I thought that if I just worked a little harder, if I dressed a little nicer, if I achieved something a little greater, they would finally validate my existence. I thought they held the physical keys to my self-worth, and they were just locking me out until I proved myself worthy of entering their perfect circle. But standing right in the middle of the Carrington Estate grand foyer that night, looking at their terrified faces, watching my parents' entire empire of lies crumble into dust under the heavy weight of the undeniable truth, I realized the most profound, important lesson of my entire life. My family never held the keys to my worth. I did. I had them sitting in my pocket the entire time. They just manipulated me, day after day, year after year, into believing I wasn't allowed to use them. My parents spent their entire lives desperately trying to convince the world they were elite. But true value does not come from a bloated bank account, a massive family inheritance, or having your name printed on an exclusive guest list. True value comes from raw authenticity. It comes from doing the hard, quiet, unglamorous work in the dark when absolutely nobody is watching you, and having the patience to trust that the results will eventually speak for themselves in the blinding light. I am 32 years old. I am an architect. I am a builder. I am a man who creates things that are designed to last for centuries. I lost my biological family, yes, but in the agonizing process of losing them, I finally gained my own soul. I don't sit around waiting for fancy invitations anymore. I build my own doors, and I walk through them with my head held high whenever I please. As we come to the absolute end of this long journey today, I want to take a sincere moment to talk directly to you, the person watching this right now. This story is deeply, painfully personal to me, but I know the raw pain of being the outcast, the black sheep, or the unappreciated child is a completely universal experience. Many of you listening to my voice right now have probably felt that exact same sharp sting of rejection from the very people who were supposed to love and protect you the most. If there is one educational lesson, one piece of hard-earned advice I want you to take away from my life story, it is this: never, ever let the broken people in your life determine your personal value. Your worth is not defined by those who are too blind or too selfish to see it. Sometimes, the absolute most empowering, life-changing thing you can do is to stop exhausting yourself trying to fit into a room where you are merely tolerated, and go out into the world and build a completely new house of your own. You have to be willing to bravely walk away from toxic history in order to protect your future peace. It takes immense, terrifying courage to stop seeking validation from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. But I promise you, the freedom on the other side is worth every single tear. I would absolutely love to know how this story resonated with you today. What is the most important lesson or takeaway you found in my experience? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to save yourself? Please share your thoughts, your feelings, and your own stories down in the comments section below. Or, if this story simply touched your heart today and you agree with the lessons shared, just drop the word "good" in the comments so I know you appreciate the message. Your engagement creates a beautiful, supportive community here, and I promise you, I read every single word you write. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your valuable time, and remember to always build a life you are incredibly proud of.